Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the LiveFitNow Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have had a wonderful week. Today's episode is quite a long one, and I would also say a different one. This episode, without doubt, is something a little bit different from all of my other episodes, but it is a long and in-depth, fascinating conversation with my guest today. I cannot wait to hear what you think, because that's the fun in having something a little bit different. I think it may spark some different ideas and thoughts. So please enjoy, give it a listen, and let me know what you think. So without further ado, here is the conversation. So how are you doing today? Have you had a good day?
It's been an interesting mix. People, schedules are, I would say, in flux at this time of year, and also in the circumstances we're in. So just trying to adapt to that, have some new opportunities I need to follow up on, because my day-to-day is, when I'm not writing, coaching people on how to write and get published, fiction and non. So there's a lot of that can be done online, but trying to find the creatives who are at the point in their life, you have to
find them.
Yeah. So the real challenge I've found lately is that because of my health, I've got about 2 hours a day I can speak. So I have to kind of book and assign those times and then work around that. So I have a new treatment, thankfully, that was just approved yesterday, which is good because it's a year long and very expensive, and I could not have afforded that on my own.
Oh, that's great news then to be able to move forward with that.
There we go. Making sure the phone is on silent.
So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this. It's a slightly, when you commented on my post, I thought, yeah, you know what, that's going to be a slightly different take, and I like that. I like to have different angles on things.
That would probably summarize most of my professional life.
Wonderful.
I've always been one of those people who, when you sit down to apply in the corporate realm or anything, like, they go, "You have such an interesting career. I'm not quite sure what to do with you."
We're better to be interesting than boring and predictable.
I forget what agency it even was at this point, but even though they didn't hire me, we sat for about a good 40 minutes or so talking about narrative structure and how it applied to the work they were doing now with their engagement programs. And I said, I'll never forget this, but it was my screenwriting teacher, Sid Field, who sadly passed a few years ago. This was true for screenwriting, but I found it valuable elsewhere as well. If you're not revealing character or moving the story forward, then what is the work is showing doing there? And this was particularly important to screenplay because you have so limited a space and time with which to write and then compose and develop and shoot the film and so on, that there isn't space and time for things that don't have a clear purpose. And talking with her about the social campaign, where you have, again, such a limited amount of attention and time span in which to engage your audience, you need to take the conversation right from, and this is a little bit of how I work sometimes in the corporate mind, from the brand identity to the engagement element, to the point of that where you're finding them online on social, right? I find what you've tweeted, I find your promo, whatever you're talking about or donating to or contributing to or being a part of online. And then out of that we derive, or you help me derive and define my story with what you provide me, product, service, etc. And again, it's such a limited amount of time. You have to take that story, that journey, move it forward, or reveal more about the relationship we're supposed to have. If it's the audience and the writer, if it's the company and the customer or the client, right? It's the same fundamentally when it comes down to story. You have to be further along by the end of this conversation than where we were when we started.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite type of writing? Are there things you prefer to work on that get you most excited?
So let's see. I started, this will sound a little absurd to some of you who aren't familiar with me, but I started writing at 2. And at that age, you don't decide what your style or your tone or your work your great American novels will be. You just want to write, and that's always remained true. I have still somewhere the first poem I wrote in 1985. There was a panda. There's a panda in my shoe, which was dictated to my folks shortly after my little brother was born. And in retrospect, is something, I suppose, my attempt at trying to make sense of what this new existence in my life was, and whether I thought it was intrusive or not, or whether I appreciated it, and how divided I was, I guess, at the time. But again, at 2, you don't articulate that entirely. You just tell your parents a story about a panda being in your shoe. And by the time I was 5, I would bind books by hand to sell door to door. The old printer paper that had the feed rip on both. Yeah. So I would rip off the perforations on both sides and turn them into bound books, hand-bound books. The first one was an illustrated book of the alphabet, each letter of animal or creature. And the second one was called And Then the Castle Died. It was a bunch of people getting together, knights, soldiers, wizards, whatever, and building a castle over the course of the book. And then the last page was ellipsis, and then the castle died as it falls down, which is an odd thing for a 4 or 5-year-old to write about. Things, existence, death, time, memory, the way things intrude or invade upon our lives. But I think in that sense, yes, the thematics, those elements have always played or been apparent in my writing, even if I haven't meant them to. I just did an interview last week talking about the book I'm writing right now. Most of my young professional life in 20s was a short story, and if not that, then journalism, interviews, lots of research papers, white papers, that kind of stuff. So always writing. And I was telling about a time I had stumbled upon a truth in the story that took me a long time to arrive at. A character had lost their sight that I should have known way back when I began writing. It's not the kind of thing you expect to find in chapter 25 or so, right? And then as I told my folks this and some of this character's life in his childhood and where he was at in this small secluded village in the mountains, and I won't go into too many details here about it, and kind of the lie inherent in that, in this little world that was crafted entirely for him. My parents gave me this funny look and they said, when you were a child, you told us about this village of no tears and how a child lived it with his parents and how always wanted to see what the rest of the world was like. And I'll summarize here, but when they took him outside to the village of those who were frightened, those who were angry, those who were always laughing, and finally he was tired and said he wanted to return, they said, you can't. And he asked why. And they said, because there is no village of no tears. That's just what you saw at the time. And here I am as a child telling them that story.
Yeah.
So my urge, my desire, I guess, as I call it, to look at the patterns, the things that I perceive in life, and come up with a way to ascribe a journey to that, right? Something that'll lead us through a path for certain kinds of emotions that we attach our own experiences and memories to. That's been a nascent urge of mine throughout my entire life. I can go maybe 4 or 5 days most without writing. I've said this in other shows, but when I did finally take a break after many years of hardship, I went to Aruba, which I'd never done before. I never expected to, but I had an opportunity. And I'm lying there on the beach in this brilliant azure water, 88-degree weather. It's been like that the whole week. And do you know what I'm doing? I'm revising a line. And I ran out of the water through these perfectly soft sands, back to my pack, to my water, ripped out my pen, still dripping wet, and wrote down the lines until I could put it down again and go back to lie in the ocean.
Do you think it helped you? Did you think that sort of escapism allowed your mind to go into new creative places, or did you never really leave the creative page?
So I've been practicing yoga, Kundalini yoga, for about, I want to say 18 years now. And the hardest part of that initially, right? Tai Chi is the same way, Qigong as well. Learning to slow down, to not take it or do it so fast. And also at what time you should just rest, right? There are certain sequences in all the techniques and the poses, the kriyas you do, where you simply lie down, or you breathe, or you stand, and you do absolutely nothing else. And those were immensely difficult at first, because when you do that, when you still your body, your mind scurries about. I tried Zazen, and that drove me mad. I couldn't sit still and watch everything flicker through my head. Moving meditation, though, walking, hiking, swimming, yoga, Tai Chi, all that, natural is breathing to me. So that was a lesson, right? If I I can find stillness, but I have to physically move in some way at the time, or else find my body quietly occupied. So yes, lying in the water, that gentle rocking, to your point, allowed my mind to settle into that creative space and time again, right? Because all of the critical thought was lulled into silence. It took a nap. And that was edifying, because you can struggle. I've spent days writing way into the night and revising for 4 hours a line, which isn't good or useful, really. And what that taught me is there's a point in time where I get tired, and I'm a perfectionist, and I have to acknowledge both of those things and lie down. In my case, it required a spinal injury. I had to, as part of my recovery, to shut off for an hour every night, lie down, listen to podcasts, not do anything. And no good.
Could you expand on that? What happened to you? When did that happen, and where are you at with that now?
Let's see. This is fascinating. The chronology slips from my mind a little, partly because of the numerous drugs I was on at the time, the head injury, but I want to ballpark it at around 2015. A lot of things happened in the past 5 years. It could easily be summarized as death, injury, illness, broken relationships, promises, and so on. Things just fell apart. And this injury was, I suppose, a tipping point in that direction, where I slipped and fell on ice. I can't say more than that, because there were a lot of legal conflicts surrounding that incident. So I signed papers that prevent me from talking too much about it. But I slipped one of the discs out of my cervical portion of my spine, which is in the neck, middle section, so badly that when the doctor who performed the surgery looked at it, he said, "So here's what a herniation usually looks like." And he shows a little bit of a point sticking out of the spine. He goes, "Here's yours." I said, "That would explain why I feel the vertebrae grinding against each other." And he goes, "Yes, because essentially the cushioning, right, is so out of place that they're not supported at all, or almost." So yeah, there'd be times where my pain is weird. Pain you're acclimated to, you stub your toe, that kind of stuff. It hurts momentarily, but you are expecting and accustomed to those things. You trip, you fall, any of those injuries, paper cuts, etc., they hurt in the moment. Spinal injuries are things that damage the nervous system, the nervous cord, etc., fibromyalgia, any neuropathy, right? We are not prepared for those things, because those are not pains we usually experience. So it's not even like I can call it on a 1 to 10 degree, because it wasn't that kind of pain. It's the point where I would go to reach something and I would find myself one arm here, one there, a foot at an odd angle, because the world had shifted into planes that were not in agreement with each other. My balance was skewed. My body couldn't tell where I was. And if I moved an iota, it would be like someone running a knife down my spine. So family, for instance, had to help me back to the couch, where I would run meetings with my clients lying down on the couch, drugged up on opiates, because I still had to do work. We had just started a business, a consulting agency at the time. And it was hard. We tried everything, right? Because surgery is hard, drastic, and invasive. But after nearly a year, I talked to the surgeon again, and he said, "Look, if I don't do this one disc now, it'll be 2 or 3 by next year. Because what will happen is the strain will refer down to the rest of the structure and just keep displacing them." Talk about weirdness, though. When he finally went in to do the surgery, he said, "Good news, 2 things. 1, your bones are in great shape, so my fear there is displaced. 2, you had a spare disc." So wow. Unlike most people, you won't notice as much of a problem by the time you're fully healed. And I went, okay. It was still a long road to recovery, during which my father nearly died of sepsis and then was hit by a car. I lost all of my grandparents sequentially, and I could only attend the funeral of one of them. The other, I had to lie to about everything that had happened, because her heart was in such poor shape we couldn't add more strain to it. So my last actual conversation with her was shortly after my birthday, where she called to talk to me, and most of the conversation consisted of pleasant lies. "Oh yeah, I have a cold. I'm a little sore. My dad's a little under the weather," and so on like that. And those things hurt. I remember when I was asked to claim damages, there was a vast angry portion of me that said, how do I begin to articulate the part where in the process of being examined for any, because I had vertigo and other ailments along. So this compounded into so many conditions, it was a nightmare. Some of them finally being treated now. But because of those uncertainties, I couldn't fly at the time. For instance, if you have an aneurysm, changes in air pressure could trigger it. So while we were trying to determine if that was a cause, I couldn't fly. My grandmother was dying that month, so I couldn't go to see her. And that hurt immensely. So here I am sitting there being asked to articulate what the harm this has done to me consists of. And I don't have the right words to say, you took that away from me. Your negligence, your inaction, the failure of things to happen the way they should have, right? However we want to frame that, took that away from me. And it hurt more after the funeral because I had learned that she was one of the few people in my family to fully understand and appreciate the writing I had been doing at the time. And I never had the chance to speak to her about it. But when we did her funeral, one of my cousins read a poem that she had written that to be read after she passed. And as we slowly discovered, one of her dreams was to write more, to share more of her thoughts or experience, what was in her mind. But she grew up at such a time when women were intended to get married. If they went to school for any purpose, it was that, to have their children and to live that life. And brilliant as she was, she had a hard life. And those opportunities weren't as open to her. So, yeah, I've experienced this loss before, but there's a certain kind of, I interviewed Diana Wan, an intense, so former Army colonel who survived what should not have been a survivable form of cancer. And one of the fears we talked about in that show was the loss of a future you thought you would have. And it's hard to think of that as a tangible pain, but you build your life, you tell the story of who you are and why toward a future you want to arrive at. And when that suddenly, for whatever reason, falls away, right? When I was in Aruba, I was so angry after all of these things had happened. My coach, my advisor had said, you need to capstone, you need to button. There needs to be an end, even if it isn't the end of the feelings or the emotions. There needs to be a finality to what's happened. So you can look back and go, yes, I still feel these things, but that was the end of the experience itself. And I remember walking out to the water one night, and she's always a fan of burning things, but of course in the States that's not, for good reason, honestly, looked upon well. And I live in a heavily wooded area, so I wouldn't dare. But it did leave me wondering, what could I do? What ritual could I perform, right, as a means by which to let go of all of this? And I found myself that evening writing with a stick with my fingers in the sands, everything that had infuriated me, that had gone wrong or right or just was awful in my life at the time. And then I stood there waiting for the water to wash it away, which of course, just being at the start of high tide, it didn't. I'm waiting and waiting 30, 45 minutes, and I said, fuck it. I grabbed a clump of sand, and I picked it up, and I threw it in the ocean. And I swear the people with their campfires burning, making their s'mores, are wondering what the hell I am doing there. I didn't give a damn. Took another handful of the sand, threw that, and ripped up every single letter I had written and threw it back into the ocean. Fine, you're not going to take it fast enough. Here it is. And that was immensely cathartic.
Yeah, you were ready to let go.
And I think that act, the physical act of being able to throw it away, however, to just let go, to give it back, to return it out of the cradle, endlessly rocking back to where it came from, to no longer be mine. All right. That was, and it's not that the pain goes away. What changes is how it persists in your life. I'll send you the photo afterwards. I was hiking on the trail, and my grandmother's name was Rosalind. Rose was her nickname. And I was, after her funeral, maybe it was slightly before, her funeral was Thanksgiving week, hiking on the trail. And there was this one last pink rose. All the other flowers had died. The trees had withered, but there was that one stubborn pink rose sitting underneath the shade of a mailbox, refusing to die. And I am by nature a skeptic, right? I'm not one necessarily to embrace the idea of what is collectively called woo-woo in so many rooms and groups, but there's a choice. And I've talked to my rabbi about this too, because he's gone through some awful points in his life. There's a choice you make. There's a thing you can decide. Whether or not that flower was her in any true or genuine sense, right? Because I can't prove that. I can't show that to anyone else except as a photo that I frame. And that's me providing a narrative of my own to this moment of my life. I can't prove in any way, shape, or form that's her right there in this moment. But I can decide to experience the moment that way. And when I, after an extensive period of illness, respiratory, that you can hear I'm still suffering from now, I went to this group called the New Media Summit for their conference, where we all had to pitch who we were, what we were doing, and why. No exceptions. You all pitch. And I had nothing when I first arrived. I struggled with what I would say, what I would bring, right? What I created as of service to someone else that I would feel comfortable and right asking them to provide for me in return for. And it made me reflect on everything I'd done in life, and I realized I'm a storyteller, someone who teaches, entertains, and guides the folks in their tribe. And we largely tell stories to inspire a thought, a course of action, to remember something by. There's a good deal of neuroscience, of course, that goes into that too, which I talked a little bit about before. One of my friends, I'm going to have on my show here with Tigers later on to go into the depths of that, because he is a neuroscientist who loves telling stories. And we've had many a conversation discussing the reasons why our minds take the intensity of emotion and attach and ascribe those to patterns to make sense of the world that we experience throughout our life. And a storyteller teaches, entertains, and guides you through those times, those moments in life. It's a liminal or transitional role. They're there to help you arrive and where you'll go next. And as I said a little earlier, this is as true for the personal life, for narrative, for fiction, as it is for business. Maps there onto brand identity, engagement, customer journey, your story, when I, the customer or client, find it, and the one you help me create together in the time with what you provide, right? What makes for a good and true and compelling story, because of the way our minds works, remains the same. We still want to feel inside our heart a thing that compels, inspires, or drives us to do something. And it can be easy, I think, particularly in the times we're now, even in our own lives, to be lost in that narrative. There are two sayings. One is from a Zen koan master, I don't remember who, but the other is from the philosopher in modern semantics. The Zen koan one, of course, is the finger is not the moon. If you ask me where the moon is, you don't need my hand to show you, it's right there. But it can be helpful to have someone remind you of where you can find it. Likewise, Korzybski would often say the map is not the territory. The representation is not the thing it represents. Although often we can mistake the story, the symbols, the narrative itself for where we're supposed to or where we'd like to arrive. And it's hard when that's your own life, right? When you see and live through your own experience and don't remember that you have these moments to decide. So here I am puzzling over all of this. And my friend Julie Sayant, who's a horse psychic, not by mission, she didn't set out at 5 and say, I'm going to speak to horses. She, as best she's told me, found themselves insisting that she listen to them and hearing them clearly wondered, right, but okay, why is this happening, and what do I do with that? Because how do I explain to someone, to these professional riders, one, I'm hearing your horse's concerns clearly as thoughts and needs and fears that they wish you would understand. So how do I convey to you those are real and genuine? And then two, how do we work from there to a place that is beneficial to this mutual relationship between two living, thinking, breathing creatures that look at the world differently? And again, as I said, I'm a skeptic, but when I receive a text that goes, where ja, 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 and I ask my folks what that is, and they say, that is the Siri voice recognition transcribing your dog. And it distinctly picks up my dog saying where, and then trying to say my name. I have to sit and wonder why. It's not the first time that's happened. It likely won't be the last, but she articulates verbally as best she can what she's thinking. And when she's with me, by contrast, is mostly nonverbals, which to the language of love and how we think and interact with the world, we all listen auditory or rely on touch, depending on different kinds of moments and situations and the like. This 5-year-old small furry animal knows that if somebody needs to get my attention immediately, touch is the way to do it. Above all else, that'll override whatever I'm thinking at. So yes, if she wants something from me, she doesn't bark. She walks over to me and puts her hand on me or leans on me and looks. And I can extrapolate from that, okay, this animal understands me well enough to know how it should communicate to me and it as opposed to someone else. Let me presume, whether I think psychic capacities are a thing or not, there is some means by which Julie understands the horse and the horse understands that it has been understood by Julie. What do you do with that knowledge? Because in a sense, you can tell me your life and not see the story in it, but I can hear and see it so clearly. I can have a client come to me with 1,000 different things their book should be, and I go, right, but here's the story. Because I know how to think and hear and listen for those things. And in a sense, how is it any different from what she's doing, right? The phenomenon might be more difficult to measure, but it is fundamentally the same experience. And here she comes and says, look, there's a story of you and your horse, but you haven't heard the horse's side.
And have you found that over the last few years, has the time you can spend on your creativity, has it helped you get through the last few years? Have you had to change the way it helps you?
Absolutely. I have a lot to say about suffering and people's perceptions of how artists should wallow in it, because there is a common perception, one, that the great works are created in fits of pique or insanity or angst, or the great moving emotions and tides and the like. And so we all pursue those stories of what a creative life is to our own detriment, because the vast majority of it is being in the stillness and the quiet and being able to listen and find. And I didn't write for a year and a half after my injuries and everything else that happened. I tried to. I couldn't even remember why. And this was immensely painful for me on an existential level. I've been writing my whole life. To hear the characters, to feel them as people, right? And that same sense that Julia was talking about before does. The horse is saying, here is my life, can you please share it with my rider? I want us to enjoy our time together, right? The characters I have lived with for this significant portion of my life, which, as I spoke about before, the whole notion of the village of no tears, here I'm thinking I've been working on this book for maybe 5-10 years, right? The seeds of it emerged as a child that just kept on growing over time. And to not be able to hear their lives, to see what they're like, to live them with them, and be able to, like with the sand and the ocean, give that to someone else, to no longer be mine. It's hard enough living one life. It's difficult and nigh impossible to contain all of those others inside of mine, because they have their own lives and wants and desires too. And they can't exist and persist entirely within me. I wish I could find this. I'll find it some way. There's this young woman, maybe 13 or 14, when she was interviewed, musical savant who could play a number of instruments composed in a number of tones, or genres rather. And when asked why, she said, I have a kingdom in my head. And within the kingdom, there are numerous rooms and palaces and castles. And within each of them, there's a person, another composer, right? And if I don't understand what a feeling or emotion is like, I know there's one who does, so I ask them. And I listened to that interview and I said, I understand you. Because these people, these characters that I write about have had their whole and full lives. They're not mine. They're things that I've never lived or been through. I've had to live through with them, right? And I know no means by which to convey their narrative except to experience it with them and share that through that, share through that process. So it is exhausting. And it makes sense then that, yes, when you are suffering and so immersed in your own pain, you don't have the space or the mind for any of that imagined or real people in your life. And I use the word imagined loosely because we turn other people into characters in our lives too. But I sat down there at 6 a.m. at New Media Summit trying to summarize all of this, right? And in talking with Julie Sayant, I said, it's so funny. We all tell ourselves stories of who we are and why. What we forget is that we have the power to define them. And it's true. Most of the coaching work I did with my clients, I do with my students now, it's so easy to be lost in the details and the pain and whatever it is that immersed you in the experience. And what I had to learn to do to pull myself out of, to be able to write again, was open up. And this sounds, I hate how cliche this sounds, but I had a dream. And again, like with the rosebud on the side of the road underneath the mailbox, I could come up with 1,000 stories why as to where that dream comes from, how it arrived. Fundamentally, it doesn't matter. I had the dream and I knew in the gut, in the heart, right, in that seed of emotional wisdom that is not physically separate from the brain, but part of that whole dynamic between what we feel and what we think about how we feel and why. I woke up from this dream and said, there is truth to this. There is truth in the story to this, even though it has no place in the story I'm writing. Which means something has to go, something has to die. I have to let go of something. In this case, I had to let go of what I thought and wanted the story to be, which to your work can be just as easily described. I have to let go of the future, the life I thought I'd planned for, desired to have, that I'd put all of my assets and mind and resources to arriving at. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, you have no final control over any of that. But you can drive yourself mad believing you do. And I looked at this somewhat surreal, fantastic dream wherein a king was with his son, the prince, walking through a promenade after a coronation ceremony or announcement of that. And there's the cameras and the cars and everything. And there's a flash and an explosion, and he loses his son, finds him again in the mob. And when he reaches that second time, it's a 5-year-old, not a 16-year-old son. And in the dream, right, I remember asking myself, is this how he sees his son, or is this another time? Which is odd, but dreams are like that. And as the dream continued and they followed and he finds and he grabs his son and his son berates him, you're the king, you can't let them see you like this. And he goes, I don't care. Let them see you're my son. Or then let them see you're my son. All of these raiments, everything else I ascribe to, I perform to be, doesn't matter to me right now. You are mine. I want to keep you alive. That's all I can hold on to, I can believe right now. And I woke up at that moment, right? Wrote it down, recorded it, then sat down and went, well, fuck. There's no king or kingdom in my story, but this belongs and I don't know why. And we have those moments in our lives where, call it new wisdom, call it new insight, call it Hegelian synthesis, where the thing you follow and the antithesis to that collide with each other and something else has to survive out of it. You can use whatever framework you'd like, but there's a choice you make. It's not a final choice, it's just a choice you make in the moment. And the perfectionist says, doesn't belong, doesn't fit, it's not right. The creative part of the mind goes, right, but what if? You've written about this other part of the world at a different point in time and from a certain perspective from those who are overthrowing and oppressed and suppressed. But you never wrote about those who were at the top of all that, who are being overthrown and why, and when that enters their life. So yes, there could be a kingdom, and I followed that what if after another and another and another, and I found out of that this fairy tale-like fantastic end to the book, because I'd struggled with a book that was 3 books that needed to be one in order right to publish for the very real concern of nobody's going to take a 1,000-page omnibus from an unknown writer. I would as a business prospect. That's insane. So how do I have that one book that is smaller than the 2 after or the 1 after? And what's the ending of that is true and genuine and right? And as my friend Nick, the neuroscientist, said, allows for the fantasy, for the fable, for the fantastic to survive. And it's so weird because in the book, there are these things that are true. There are those too full of fire, literally and figuratively, and those who dream too much. That world isn't ours by that, just by those 2 truths alone. That's not our world. It's some other different world can be like ours, right? But those are fantastic things to be literally and figuratively full of fire. So here I am holding on to this thing that is fantastic, yet at the same time denying, no, it can't be more than that. It can't be any more weird or strange or fantastic, even though the dream and everything else, that creative urge and desire that after months is still going, I know you don't want to, but I'd still like to try, right? There's something here we can find. What I had lost in the time was the joy of the writing. And the fear I had was that I'd never find it again. That I could go back to the work, that I would complete the work, but not be able to find the joy that sustains it, because you cannot do a work, a life work, a calling of any kind, if you do not love it more than you despise it. My friends who teach, they have a number of horror stories, but they still teach. Why? Because they love helping children learn. And the pain comes from that point of love, because they want to be able to see things go further and better more often than they have, and they're often frustrated by the systems, the consequences, the circumstances in place that limit that, then you find yourself fighting against. But you can still teach in a quiet moment. And when I return to this idea of that I'm a storyteller, PR marketing, social media journalist, those are all hats I've worn, titles I've had for a time. I've always been a storyteller throughout the entirety of that. When I think back to listening to Ray Bradbury speak at the LA Times Book Fair, listening to him as an orator, right, tell his tales, his stories of his life. It's an old role in society, one we don't necessarily look at and find a name for now. And I don't know how true you found this in your work, but when I was at PodFest this past March, I sat down with a random fellow and we were talking. He said, it's funny. I've thought for so long in my business that I'm the hero of my journey. It's my business, it's my work, right? And I realized, no, I'm the guide. My clients are the hero in their story, that I'm helping them arrive. I am the hermit from the mountain or something else, like whatever else fits. And then you don't even have to apply to the hero's journey. I don't, by and large. I'm using it when I say writing or hero's journey or Zen, these are all ways by which to view and think about the experience you're having. These are hands that point or fingers that point to the moon. They're not the moon. So it did make me think, though. You're right. On the one hand, there is this fine edge of it is my business, my money, my finances, my work, which pushes me toward the idea of being the center of that universe. And then wanting to find schools of thought and philosophy that justify my wants and desires and the manifestations of those returning to me in riches and wealth and prosperity and so on. But I find personally that I struggle with that because it's so gloriously self-centered. And storytelling doesn't work. It is not an experience that survives without someone else to encounter that narrative, that point in their life, and take from it what they will have that tale survive on their own and change it as they go through the course of their life. I can write a book. I can write many books. They can sit on a shelf or online. But when you pick up, as one of my readers did, the first pages of my book, it's a Jungian psychologist, and she said to me, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to ask you a few things. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. This character, Adam, this young man describing the life he's in right now, is this a story he's telling himself of the way the world is? And I looked and listened to that, and I'd been struggling with a truth, the blindness, right, in the book, because he had revealed that as just an offhand statement or something asked and then him saying in reply, I've always been, right? And I talked about this a lot on the other show, so I won't delve into too much here, but it was as blow to me as I'm a storyteller. I know where stories go. I know the truths of my world. And suddenly, here's a new one, but not. I look back to what my friend Julie had said. I look back to the beginning of the book and said, absolutely, yes, this is a story a child tells himself of the way the world is when he can't see it any other way. When he only has his mother and his father in the small remote mountain village, in this village of no tears, right? And everything he's told himself about the way the world is what they can help him see or perceive, because his mother is one of those who dream too much. So a little bit of fantasy there. She asks him what color the sky is. He says, and the sky is that color. For as long as he's in that little moment of his life. And he's a difficult character. He does a lot of awful things later, but for me to return and be able to write those scenes of him walking out into the fields the first time, running his hands along the wheat and the amaranth through a sheep's wool, trying to define them, figure out what they look like. All these strange colors and smells and sounds as his parents argue beside him, what they should let him figure out for himself and why. I wish, I have this desire at times that I will arrive there someday, that I could just tell this to my team of animators, describe it to them, and then watch as it comes alive on the screen. My neuroscientist friend and I have actually talked about what technology would be needed to arrive at the point where I could simply think those things and then paint them, as we did with the Caves of Lascaux, right, or so many others. Here is the moving image right from my mind. Because I see it, I hear it, I think it, I feel it. It's so rich and deep and intense. And now I'm trying to use words to define that and hope that you, the reader, the audience, or however else you experience this narrative, can see something like what I saw at the time.
That really would be a wonderful breakthrough, wouldn't it? If we could simply get those thoughts straight out, that would be so fantastic. And I'd really like to ask you about your journey with your own health. Have you always been someone who's taken care of themselves? Have you had to reconnect and grow with your own health journey in order to be able to fully express yourself creatively again?
So I was a premature baby by about 2 months. I had no fingernails, I had no eyelashes either. My hair was red, my skin was green, I had terrible jaundice. My circulatory system wasn't fully formed, nor my ligaments. I could, even as a small child, I could voluntarily dislocate my joints, which, to give you an idea of what I was like as a child, my grandmother wished upon my mother, the middle child in her family, when you have one, I hope they're as rotten as you were. That was my grandmother's blessing. And I've told this before, but when we lived in the city, I loved to go to FAO Schwartz. It was just this fantasy land of giant toys and trains, and we weren't that wealthy, or didn't have much at all. So to be able to go into this magical land and just enjoy it was a delight. But time is limited. Got to work. Parents are running their own business, right? My dad's a photographer. My mom's a PR marketing consultant. Didn't have time to go to FAO Schwartz, so I looked at her, I saw the police officer on the road, and I dislocated my shoulder. Popped my arm right out, which is hideous and ugly and purple and black. And I go to the police officer and go, "Excuse me, Mr. Officer, my mommy beats me," which is awful.
Wow.
absolutely awful. And of course, she managed to explain to him, no, he's has some medical conditions and is also a tyrant. And I have struggled physically throughout my entire life with joint issues, which partly is why I'm susceptible to injuries like falls and impacts, because the connective tissue is not as firm as it would be in some people. I could, at one point, fully rotate my arms 360, which you shouldn't be able to do. And I had to have a significant amount of work done on my shoulder back in 2010 because of an injury related to that. I've always had a vulnerable respiratory system. I have Raynaud's, which, these are all genetically connected. So yeah, it wasn't that I was sickly. I just had certain parts of my body that were prone to injury or illness or ailment. And we had to be careful for that. I was the first child, so parents treat you like china at first. Second one's a rubber ball, they bounce everywhere. Though I would say, honestly, I didn't really enjoy being in a physical body, right? Until college. I was the fat kid who was picked last. I had enjoyed soccer a lot, but I think just as I was beginning to progress toward a life where I'd do that as a continuous thing throughout the years, we had a drunk caretaker who drove her car into a tree with my brother and myself inside. And we survived, amazingly, but I had pretty severe injuries to my knee and my arm. Couldn't go to soccer that year and just never connected with it again. And I miss it still. Back in college, I played it again, but it took me a long time, I would say. College, I'd been the fat kid. I'd been the last kid. I said, you know what? I don't have to be any of those things. So my school has a physical therapy program. The students there work as trainers in the gym. I signed up with a nutritionist. I signed up with a trainer. I went to the chapel, signed up for Zazen, and then eventually, I forget what form of yoga it was initially, probably Hatha. And eventually I found a dojo in the town, Ithaca, where I live. So it was a pretty comprehensive one. You had Tai Chi, Aikido, yoga, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Anything you could like, Iaido, and practiced there for a while. Funnily enough, I found Kundalini working as a camp counselor. The karate teacher there was in his 40s and had obliterated his knees. I found him during break as we were talking as he was going through a set, and we discussed. And he said, no, you should try this. It's really great for travel. It's portable. You just have to get used to how different it is as a style. And I gave it a try. And Kundalini's rough. That's like deciding to be a professional diver and going into the deep end first. There is a lot of, I suppose, what you would call loosely psychological or soul work that goes into it that you're not prepared for if you're thinking of it as a routine of exercises. And when I was in Australia, was enrolled in these massage courses where they would talk about where emotions dwell in the body. So for instance, fear, sadness, joy all tend to sit in the abdomen. I'm not a doctor. I'm not saying this as a prescriptive measure. This is from observed experience. When you would massage people and go through the deep tissue massage in the abdomen, one of two reactions would occur. They would laugh or they would cry. And I don't mean ha 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 or boo hoo. I mean deep racking laughter or sobbing tears. And I thought, well, that's fascinating, right? That we should physically bind our emotions to places. I tried playing the didgeridoo. That with my lungs was not a easy thing to do. The circular breathing was difficult to master, which is funny because I've been swimming most of my life, and even as a child, I loved swimming. I ended up returning to that as part of my rehabilitation. And for me, after the spinal and the shoulder surgery, being able to go back to the therapist, right, and say, yeah, I did butterfly. And he goes, what? I said, I did butterflies. Should I not be able to? And he goes, no. So, but I wanted to, and I tried, and I did. So is there something wrong? He goes, you know what? If you can do it. I had to amend certain other things because they're too much of a strain on the neck. But yeah, being able to, and I'm not create a butterfly, but simply the fact that I could dive into the water, feel a part of it. And so yeah, Kundalini was rough. I taught myself mostly over the years. And I learned that no, if you're going to dedicate yourself to a physiological practice that is grounded in a belief of the body and the emotions and the soul, all of that being attached to each other in some fashion. And attached is a good word to use there. You don't have to think of it as a physical attachment, but there's, just as the horse and the rider, the swimmer in the ocean, there is a relationship, or to think of them as separate is fundamentally not useful. All right? You are your body as much as you are your feelings, your thoughts and emotions, your desires, the future you wanted to live, the past you describe. All of that's you. So, yeah, I spent a lot of time grappling with thoughts about, and faiths. My father's Episcopalian and my mother's Jewish. There's some clashes there as to what the purpose of the body is versus the soul, the role of it as a vehicle, a means of conveyance as opposed to being you, right? And this coincided with research into cybernetics and a whole bunch of other stuff. If I find a school of thought that I find fascinating, I dig into it. And I didn't like Kurzweil's argument, for instance, that the you is the river and your body is just the water passing through it, essentially, because our cells are always sloughing off, right? Our cells are the body, therefore our body is impermanent. But your cells are not you. Your cells are a part of you and contain many yous within. So I had to, in a sense, through the physical act of Kundalini, and I'll never forget this, I was reading Rumi. Talk about foolishness, or I suppose shaking your fist to the heavens. Rumi goes into this idea of self-annihilation, of burning down everything you thought was, or letting go of, if you want to go a more gentle sense, the things you thought were you, right? To find what else is there, to see what survives. So foolishly, there I am in my 20s going, fine, you know what? Set it all on fire. Let's see what's left. Oh, it hurts. Being burnt hurts. It never will not. But there is a quiet joy, all right, in being able to read his poem, who says these words with my mouth. How did I arrive here? I can't go back the way that I came from, but I know I'll go there someday. There's, and as I've said before, death, time, memory, change. Those have always been the themes of everything I write, even as a child. I don't entirely, still to this day, know why. I just know they're the things I write about. They're the notes I play. And I returned from Australia. I returned from this desire to let go of where I had been at the time, what had led me to where I was. It had helped, right? It helped me get to where I was. And my friends and family said, oh, why do you have to go 10,000 miles away? I said, because I need the distance. I need that physical space, not to get away from any of you, but to find mine, my own, to live in my own space. My friend Nick, when I was studying with him and a few others in Prague, they invited me to church one day, and I said, I appreciate your offer, right? Because, well, your father's Episcopalian. I said, I know, I get where you're going. But what I honestly need is not to be in a space where everyone else is trying to find themselves or convey themselves. I need to have enough space. I need to go out into, and this is so prosaic, the cherry orchard in the back of an old college campus in Eastern Europe and Prague, right? To lay out my mat, to go through a set and to meditate, and to just not feel confined. And yes, it's still an ongoing journey, but for me, there was that understanding I have to love, like, and appreciate the body that is mine. It's going to be mine for a long time, or I'd like it to be. And parts of it will be repaired and replaced, certainly. They have been, out of need. But this is somewhat of what my creative mind is like. I think of one story and I'm reminded of others. French class in high school, probably my junior year, my friend Shion was taking a photography class. And my dad's a photographer, so those moments stand out in my life when people are taking photos, because there's a whole story they're comprising in that moment. I'm framing this scene to capture, to describe, right? And I'm listening to the teacher, and he's leaning over this odd angle trying to capture a certain shot that I can't find. And I look and I go, "Are you?" And sure enough, he's taking a picture of my hand, just as it's leaning onto the textbook. And he goes, "Don't move." He said, "The shadows are so perfect right there." And this is going to sound weird, like, don't take it any particular way, but your hands are amazing. So can you just leave them where they are for a moment so I can get this shot? He says, like, the articulation, he wasn't gushing or anything. But he was just like, there's an image here I want to preserve. So can you just not move for a moment so I can do that? And my dad's a photographer. If he points the camera at me, I blink, I stick my tongue out reflexively. I don't like having my picture taken. So I bit my tongue. I went, okay. But it stands out to me now because it is a moment of someone else appreciating your physical existence as it is in the moment, which is something at that time I did not do. So yeah, of course, it seemed alien to me that anyone could find this in any way, shape, or form, even some portion thereof, of interest in any fashion. And again, the fat kid, you're not the desirable one. But it comes back to my mind now because we do that so often to ourselves. We live these partially assembled, disastrous lives comprised of our photo book of things that have happened and why. But we need, I think, as you said earlier, the moment to sit back and reflect, to not create the story, but to understand and ask and decide, or rather, to ask what if and decide on the why.
Has Kundalini and the fact that practice was already part of your life helped you in the last 5 years since your accident?
I couldn't do the shoulder stand for a long time for obvious reasons. It hurt severely. I was addicted to opioids for about 4 months, and I had quit them during my shoulder surgery 3 days after they were prescribed. I just roughed out that pain. It was miserable. But spinal surgery, particularly in the neck, you can't eat. You have difficulty breathing. You can't move your own head. It was so immensely debilitating. And opiates make you not care. They do dull the pain, but fundamentally, they take away any cares you have, any feelings, just like the ocean drift away. So yeah, it is an addictive chemical because your body, your mind start to desire that state. It's a place we can arrive at through other ways, but the medicine makes it so much easier without trying. While it's destroying you, of course. But when I finally could return through the PT, and the initial elements were, of course, can you turn your head? You're moving your eyes too much. Very simple things. But yes, to be able to, the day I could do the wheel again, this full backwards, upside down, inverted pose, and not just as in quivering, shaking, shoulder aching in the wrong position, move an inch, do the wheel, but just breathe, exhale, roll out into it. And like with swimming, like with that moment of finding the story and being able to share it and seeing it come to life in someone else's eyes, in their mind. When you exult in what you can do and who you are in that moment in your body, and this sounds a little woo, I suppose, but we're going there. It is a divine feeling. I can do this. I am this. This simply being in a different physical place. All the literature talks about opening up the channels in the spine and the serpent energies and stuff like that. You can adhere to it or not. It's a science of a different kind, I suppose, is how some folks define it. But the simple moment of being able to, and I've had this happen often, swim, shower, run, hike, do an exercise like that. I will, in the moment after and lying down, go, oh, that's that beat in that scene. Oh, I just realized this. Here's a thought, here's an insight. Because I am so deeply in the moment, I'm dwelling in it. And it makes me think back to what my poetry professor, James Reagan, would say about how to write poetry. He said, before you put a pen to the page, before you write anything at all, first you must be in the space. You must feel and observe what there is. And so, yes, now I can go out and stand in the rain, and you get wet. That's what happens when you stand in the rain. But if you stand in the rain long enough and you don't think I'm wet or I'm cold or anything in particular, and you look at the grass as each drop strikes it, there's this moment where you can think or feel or realize, oh, they're alive too. Each little drop, each little flicker. And you can just stand there in amazement and wonder and watch as the rain falls and the grass flickers and the sky moves. And that's fine. There doesn't have to be anything else to that moment, just that. When you swim, when I perform the Kriyas, right? Yeah, there can be moments like that where, or even in Tai Chi, no, don't focus on breathing, don't any of this, just dwell. Heidegger sitting on my shelf for partly that reason, the whole idea of being in space, in time, in your place, embodiment, right? There's so much joy along with the pain and frustration. And I won't be able to say this the right way, but last night I was on the trail, or evening I was on the trail writing. One of the other characters, Connor, he is sitting to have breakfast with a fisherman that he knows. And he's, through a series of deeply traumatic experiences, lost an eye. He's got some scarring to that. He's sitting down, out, going out into public again. And that's without me going into the fantastic elements, just here's, if you were to see this man walking down the road. And the fisherman's remarking as he's breaking breakfast for him, that this crooked, wonderful smile you have is even more charming, more delightful now, because you do it despite. It's not like the injury or the loss of the eye suddenly made you hideous or anything. It's simply that smile, and there's a certain beauty to a crooked smile. It's hard to describe. We're so attracted to symmetry, but to something like having the beauty mark in the place it shouldn't be, or to the smile that tilts a little too much on the one side. There's something about that inexactness, that impreciseness that says this is unique and distinct and alive. And here's the fisherman cooking a flurry away with his daughter and her friends to the people they're eating, talking to one of his customers and trying to explain to them, no, yes, it was charming or delightful before when you would smile like that, but that was just that. To see that smile now with all else alongside it, to know that you smile despite, to know that there's still pain and everything else lived in this body, but you still feel and can share that. And I'm going into what would be in this language, in the book itself, the subtext or other more quietly crafted beats, but I'm explicating it to walk you through the why. Yes, being in a body fucking hurts. Living hurts. Existence hurts. There's pain all the time. There's pain right now. In so many deep social, philosophical, existential, emotional, personal ways. And it's hard to find or define or refine or revise your own story in all of this. You know, I have friends who call me an empath and they ask what that's like and whether or not I ascribe to that. Yeah, they see that in me. And I say, it's hard to live in a world where people are in so much pain and not feel able to separate myself from that because I read it and feel it so much, however you want to define that. But to be able to smile despite, to know that there is still some beauty in that life. There's still the rose underneath the mailbox by the side of the road, even though it's freezing outside. You have to decide on what these moments mean to you in your life. And it's not something we define just once or at any given point in time. We're always deciding. It's easier in fiction to see how that happens and why. But even in our own lives, you don't have to be the character you thought you were. Your friends and family don't have to be the people you assign and describe them to be. You have to be able to allow yourself to find what else is out there, what else you could learn, you could hear from, you could use to see or describe where you're at. And I think so importantly, if there's a moment of joy, just take it, just seize it, relish it, smile, even if, and this is something else my friends have said of me, so this is an insight gained from elsewhere. They said, we know you're at your worst when you can't laugh, when you can't even make a joke. I have a deeply dry and dark sense of humor. If I can't stay in that place, they know things are bad for me. Because they know that even at most of those times, I can still just flat out say something and go, well, that is as it is. And I have to actually, to give you context for this, I have to put on my socials little smiley faces, etc., just to make sure people know I'm not being serious. Because I can be that dry. But you have to allow yourself to find the joy and to, I'll pluck these two from Bradbury, right, from Dandelion Wine. There's a point where Douglas Spalding goes down to the basement where his family's been pickling and preserving and saving everything else for later. And he stands there and contemplates two jars, savory and relish. Spices, foods, right? But here's 8, 9, 10-year-old Douglas Spalding contemplating what those words mean to him and to his life, to savor and to relish. So when I saw Bradbury speaking, yes, is he cantankerous? Was he a cantankerous 90-plus-year-old man and dying and in severe pain? Would he survive for much longer? No. But the thing he said to us, that he's always said, despite everything else he's done and been, to create is to find joy in life. If you're going to be an artist, and we all can, we all should be, we are all storytellers at each day and moment in our lives, you don't need to fall to the suffering to be inspired. You can just as easily allow yourself, and it will seem damnably hard at the time, but you can allow yourself to find joy, to laugh, to smile, to crack a smile, and see what kind of world that creates.
I just love that thought. And when you first messaged me, you described you would be a great person to talk about letting things go, and having talked to you now for the last hour, I can see there's so much you've had to let go of. And is that the thing that you would want to leave people with, that whatever your story is, whatever it is you've been through, however big or small, that we need to just let things go so we can move forward?
There's a book, it might be out of print now, by Nielsen Mill-Madrona called Coyote Wisdom. And he worked often with drug addicts, with terminally ill patients, folks who are at a difficult liminal point in their lives. And I always remember this one story where a younger woman was dying of cancer. There was no, in all likelihood, no chance of survival. And she was struggling with letting go. She felt like a mouse being chased by an eagle and running from its talons as they were approaching. And he walked her through this exercise and he said, okay, what if? What happens when the mouse is caught? What happens next? Let's go. Let's follow that thought. Well, it takes me up to the nest to the birds, and I get torn to shreds and get fed to the birds that then grow up to be eagles, and we just kept on going. And she was so caught up in that story, in her end, in the end. I love The Last Unicorn, the movie. My students have watched it too, by request. There's a moment where Schmendrick the wizard is asked, will they find a happy ending? And he says, no. There are no happy endings because the story never ends. We like endings because they define things. But that's not how life works. So it's not just letting go. Letting go is essential, right? You have to ask yourself, what if? But then comes the question of, or the answering why. If I ask myself what happens when a child lives alone in a village with just his parents and to help him imagine what that's like, I have to wonder what will happen when he leaves there, when he returns, when why. If a youngest of 7, the other narrator, Connor, gets into a fight and his parents divorce and his father gives him off to his mother and she takes him up to the attic, which is being adapted for him to live. It's one of those steeple places with the pillows tucked right under the window. And she walks upstairs with a little stuffed animal, right? I can say on the page, little stuffed animal, and let you imagine what that is. Some of us might do that. But I knew it was a tiger. I could see it. I've talked to my friend who's an illustrator, and I've described it to them. It'll be on the book cover. There's a version of it in my logo on Here Be Tigers that they drew, right? And in the sketch they drew of it, it brought me back to when I was a child of 2, perhaps, and my parents brought for me, for my birthday, a Winnie the Pooh cake, which I liked at the time. And on the cake was this little tiger, right, that looked exactly like the one my friend in Germany, who I'd never told the story to, had designed. So, yes, there's an element of letting go. I had to let go of what I thought the book was, what I thought the title was, everything I wanted it to be. But here, I'm seeing again and again this image of the tigers with a Y, like in Blake's Tiger, or Here There Be Tigers is in what is left unknown or undiscovered in the map before we had defined all that. I had to leap and go on the unknown territory, right? Why does this symbol emerge so prominently, so powerfully? Why would I read Blake's Tiger and look over the prologue again? Do I see the symbolism without my intent embedded in the narrative? So there is that leap. You take your dive, right? You have to have faith and trust in where you'll arrive. You won't know where you'll arrive. I go on the trail. I'm still terrified I'll find nothing. I've been doing this for years. And maybe that day I won't. But I know there will come a time when I will. So I have to, each time I go on the trail, let go of that fear a little bit in order to allow myself to find what's there. It's not a one-time letting go, all right? It's an exercise, it's a kriya, it's a routine, it's a practice, however you arrive at it. There's an exercise I gave to one of my students. Put your hands under the water at the end of the night after you brush your teeth. This is a thought, but it's not me. That is a thought, but it's not mine. Just wash your hands at the end of the day of everything still floating around in your head. Doesn't have to be that exercise. But in her case, she was struggling with all the stuff the creative work was stirring up in her mind that wouldn't rest or be quiet at the end of the day. So what she needed, right, was a ritual to divide. Now is the time for you to sleep. Now I lay me down to rest. So it's an ending, but it's not the ending. So yeah, I guess that's part, if we want to go full circle, first step is let go. Second is the journey you'll describe. Right? the one you'll have to trust and have faith in where you'll arrive. And then the third point here is that, or the lesson I suppose we'll leave you with, when you get there, that is an end, but that's an end for tonight.
Wonderful. That's such a lovely way to bring it to a close. And if any of my audience wants to get in touch with you, is the podcast the best way, or are there any places we can get your works if we want to read?
Certainly. So the podcast can be found, it's Here Be Tigers, that's with a Y, on Apple, Spotify, all of the major programs. We also have our sibling shows, which I'll give you the links on. You can support the shows in the network itself on our Patreon, which is /Here Be Tigers. For my professional work, which is the coaching I do with business folk, with creatives, to help them find their tales, make them come to life, bring them to the tribes, that's herebetigers.com, again with a Y. I do offer now a complimentary session, a 20-minute conversation to help you figure out what you need and where you're at, which I'll give you the link to, but that's 20 Minutes to Brilliance. That's 20minutestobrilliance.com/tigers. And I will soon be launching what I like to think of as kind of a gift to yourself or someone else, a 90-minute session for about $200, $197, where we sit down with the thing you're struggling with right now, and we define a solution to that, sink our teeth into it, and start that journey. People have been quite receptive to that, so I'm going to launch it officially soon. On Twitter, I need to change my handle there. It's still my old one, but Instagram, you can find me at HBTigers. Twitter, I'll change that over to that as well, although it's currently J. Cerf, no F, the realist. I've been on Twitter for a decade. But the book, as I write it, is on the Patreon. I'm going to put more of it again on Medium. We're shifting the Patreon a little bit more to focus on the teaching, the guiding, and entertaining. So those are our three offers. Lessons, small ones, things you can do right now, stories you can join us in creating right now, and then the guiding will be workshops or one-on-ones where we can participate in what you're creating. Those I find are great for the folks who are beginning their careers, who need something consistent but simple. For those of you who want to dive headlong into the solutions right now, the site Here Be Tigers, contact me. There's the best way to go, because like any good coach or guide, one-on-one is where the magic happens, fundamentally. That's where we can work with the specifics of the story you're trying to create, the thought of action, the thought course of action, or something you're trying to remember. You can tell I'm running out because my ability to articulate is failing me. But yeah, this will all be in the show notes. I actually would love to be able to get a copy of this audio to pass on to some of my students who are doing the beautiful work for me of capturing the things I say.
Yeah, fantastic. No problem.
Thank you. I'm so glad we had the chance to talk today about this. And if you want, we can perhaps have some of your audience on later to do a workshop of things with them. I find the best way to do this or show its effectiveness is to demonstrate it live. So if you want to do a workshop or some kind like that down the road, we can talk about
Great.
that. And if you're open to it, I'd love to have you on my show at some time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. I can't believe how quickly time has flown. It has been such an interesting conversation. I could listen to you all day. So thank you ever so much for your time today. And I look forward to more connections in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 27 of the LiveFitNow podcast. I think you'll agree with me that was quite a special and unique episode, and I really hope you were engaged and enjoyed it as much as I did, because it was something a little bit different but so very interesting. Myself and Jarod would love to hear your feedback, so do not hesitate to click through on the show notes, or you can send me an email to hello@livefitnow.co.uk. We would love to hear your thoughts. This episode will also be uploaded onto YouTube, so if you know someone who would prefer to listen through there, that would be wonderful if you can share. And don't forget, word of mouth, spreading the message on your social media, and telling your friends and family about your favourite episode will help us spread the message of the Live Fit Now podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next Thursday.